Sometime in the not-so-distant past, something occurred in the astral plane, an event that had repercussions throughout the multiverse. A dead god began to stir. Of course, fallen deities returned to life every now and then, but this time was different. The power continued to rise, his appearance slowly changing, his form slowly warping. Then the god simply vanished from the silvery void. Only the guardian of the dead gods, he who once was Anubis, noticed the disappearance, and he shuddered at the implications. One of his charges was returning to life, and his name was Orcus. What was different from Orcus's resurrection from death from other deities is that when typically gods return from the dead, they come back alive. But that wasn't quite the case for Orcus, who was the lord of the dead. How proper, isn't it, for a symbol of death to instead return in Undeath? No other proper god would dare be deleted from existence and die only to return in this fashion. But is Orcus still a god? Or is he something else? What is his story and who indeed killed him? Well, before we get into it, check out this amazing description. Quote, "The towering bulbous form is a bulwark of crimson flesh. Horns as black as onyx, crested slopping forehead curving forward to evoke the unnerving image of a sneering skeletal ram. Pinpoints of hellfire, white, hot, peer from the hollows of the fiend's eyes as it exhales smoke and steam, the stench of rot and refuse almost overwhelming. A pair of draconic wings unfurled from the malevolent prince's back, the tattered membranes pallid and translucent. Chains draped with humanoid skulls clatter against the demon's black plate armor as it steps forward on stout legs that end in hooves. It hefts a wicked-looking mace and looses an otherworldly roar." This incredible description for an Orcus meetup comes from Describe.com, our sponsor for today's video. Describe is an incredible source for high-quality, professionally made box descriptions for monsters, spells, many different characters, and locations. They really do have thousands and thousands of descriptions, and all you have to do is search for what you're looking for, and you're guaranteed to find it, plus many other adjacent descriptions that relate to your search. Look, if you search Cure Wounds, you not only get a normal version of Cure Wounds, but also professionally made descriptions for a Cure Wounds that comes from a more dark spell. You get Mass Cure Wounds, and you also get a healing spell made by Cauterizing Flames. If you were to scroll down, you would get so many more, by the way. There's a ton, and you can find these for almost any single spell in the game. I mean, look at these descriptions. They are really, really good. Further, in their quest to have amazing descriptions for anything imaginable D&D related, they have started to partner up with some of your favorite D&D battle map creators like Seppuku, who I am 100% sure that you have seen their work. They have some of the best battle maps out there. So now Seppuku is doing maps and Describe is describing them. Further, Describe is currently doing a giveaway where a lucky winner will get an entire year's worth of membership for Describe, an entire year's membership for Seppuku's Patreon, where you can get literally hundreds of high-quality D&D battle maps, and of course, the best of all, you get a Mr. Rex merch pack, where you can get everything on my merch store, including my new beautiful Orcus set of jackets, which are just amazing if I may add. So go over and click the links below to check out Describe and get 10% off your purchase, and also make sure to check out and apply for that giveaway. I mean, there's just way too much for you to win, for you to miss out on it, so you have to do it. Real talk, guys, their descriptions are genuinely awesome, and they're expanding like crazy to have so many items, monsters, and spells covered, so please go ahead and give them a check. But now, back to the video. When Tenethos, the Lair 113th of the Abyss, was taken over from Orcus, and Orcus was defeated and slain, the new ruler claimed this, which was to be heard by all who belonged to the Lair. I know that some of you have ever wondered, what happens when a demon lord gets deposed and slain? Well, listen to this. Quote, "Know that now and forevermore, he who once claimed Thanatos is no more. The past master of this place is gone, and shall not return. I, Curensali, mother of vengeance and mistress of unlife, rule here now and shall into infinity. My will is law in Tenethos, for it is now my realm. Let no soul, mortal or otherwise, speak of the former ruler again. let no written word anywhere in all existence, past or present, record his misbegotten appellation. Let this be the last moment any creatures ever hear the name fall upon their ears. The last voice to speak the name shall be that of his executioner, and I say it now for the final time. Orcus." End quote. See, Kyrinsali used to be a drow demigod, just one of the many powers under the boot of Lolth. Trying to break free from Lolth, she attempted something incredible. Orcus had done some slight to Kyrinsali in the past that her, being a demigod of vengeance, could not let go. Orcus himself, after eons of stalemates fighting both Demogorgon and Grassid, had grown complacent, had grown fat. See, Orcus hates life, but what he truly hates is the vibrancy of life. The activity of the living, all that noise, all that movement, everyone chirping and talking and walking and creating and laughing. Why can't people just simply stop? Why can't we all just rest in peace? Can we all just shut up? A still world with nothing that moves or barks. That's the world that Orcus wants to live in. And for a while he had it, on his realm at least. The wars against the other demon lords yielded no results, and he had all the souls that he could ever want. And so he spent his days gorging himself on larvae until he literally grew obese. He just let his guard down, and Kyrinsali ambushed and slayed him. Quote, "The goddess then used strong magic to wipe away every mention of her foe's name, wherever and however it had been recorded. She lacked the power to erase the very memory of Orcus from the minds of the multiverse, which is what she really wanted to do, but her enchantments still swept through the planes, removing the name Orcus from all histories, etchings, and the like. Thus did she reshape Thanatos into her own image, though the undead residents remained virtually unchanged. Lastly, Kyrinsali dealt with the Wand of Orcus, the former ruler's most cherished and mighty artifact." End quote. It was, of course, her inability to erase memories that facilitated the result of Orcus later on, but she did indeed kill Orcus, and then, of course, sent his corpse adrift amongst the astral plane, even if only for a time. Thing is, Orcus was indeed a god, but to what extent is actually very unclear. Out of all of the demon lords, Orcus has the biggest following on the Prime, and always did. Many do believe that it is because Orcus stands for something very specific and very easy to understand. A primeval desire for all mortals. It's something that everybody wants. Immortality. The lore is very vague nowadays about what exactly is his power or where he stands amongst divinity, but it has been described that Orcus technically does not have the ability to grant spells per se, as much as he has the incredible ability to funnel the negative energy plane and then send it towards his followers, of course, granting them abilities that may be quite like magic. But the reality is simply that many people revere him as a god. They pray to him and perform grand sacrifices in his name. And out of all of the demon lords, he simply has the biggest following, and if there is a demon lord that is the closest to true divinity, it would be indeed him. And so, in spite of all records of his name being deleted from existence, this did not stop those who would want their lord resurrected to act in his honor. It is also kept very vague exactly what happened that caused the body of Orcus to shift into Undeath. It's interesting that the lore even describes Acerak, the bad guy from Tomb of Annihilation and Tomb of Horrors, to have something to do with it, but something did happen, and Orcus woke up. See, for as long as a god has followers, people that pray to them and believe in them, you can't really, truly kill a god, and frankly, Orcus still had followers. Those followers prayed to him, and he woke up. Thing is, the Wand of Orcus, a very well-known powerful artifact, is a big part of Orcus himself. There is a grand portion of his essence and soul that resides within that wand, and without it, Orcus could not truly be back to how he used to be. Kyrinsali had hidden it somewhere deep in Pandemonium, and those she had trusted with hiding it were slain by drowning in the river Styx. A very clever solution, by the way, since even if they were to be resurrected, they would have amnesia, since of course, those who fall into the river Styx have their memories erased by the river. And so this new undead Orcus, now more a vestige or a shadow of his former being, needed to find his wand. And for this, he needed to travel through the planes incognito. And so he chose a different name to go by, at least for the moment. Quote, To celebrate and signify his new state of existence, Orcus chose a new name. Now a thin, small, shadowy creature, he called himself Tenebrous, for he was shut off from the light of life forevermore. It was more, he'd lost too much strength to hold on to his former level of divinity. It lesser than even a demigod now, a Tenebrous could no longer form avatars. But make no mistake, he was still a god, far beyond the strength of the mightiest mortal and still in command of potent and terrible might. And more than ever before, he hungered to exact revenge on those who had wronged him. And in his new, twisted state, twisted both physically and mentally, that meant everyone in the multiverse. Bathed in unholy energies, Tenebrous left the astral by way of Yggdrasil, the world ash, whose branches wind their way through the cosmos to reach many, some say all, planes. He knew he'd need help to regain his former power, but in trying to summon his old servants, Tenebrous discovered that they too had been slain by Kyrian. So he brought them back to unlife. These undead Tenari he called Visages, and he set them upon the task of secretly gathering information to aid in his vengeance. Yggdrasil allowed them to walk the plains as needed, and the quiet town of Crux, nestled in the branches of the world ash, served as a secret base. No one knows exactly how much time passed at this point in the tale. Suffice it to say that some years later, Tenebrous discovered the means by which to achieve his evil goal. In the ruins of Pelion on the plain of Arborea, the undead lord found the last word. It was the ultimate magic of unmaking, a force potent enough to slay even a god. Just the thing Tenebrous sought. But Tenebrous lacked one important item, the talisman that made him what he was. He needed his symbol, the tool that contained a portion of his very essence, the thing that made it clear to his enemies that he had returned, the thing that let him strike fear into the hearts of his foes so that they'd know in their last seconds of life exactly who had defeated them. The being that had been Orcus needed his wand. End quote. The story is actually really interesting. Tenebrous went over to the plane of Mechanus and killed the Modron Primus using this ancient magic called Last Word. It is not described exactly how the magic works, but it seems to function as a divine version of Power Word Kill that basically works on even deities. It's probably some relic of the Dawn War from eons ago, but in any case, he killed Primus, the god of Modrons and the god ruler of Mechanus, and then forced what is called a Modron March. See, Modrons every 289 years make what is called the Great Modron March, or also known as the Modron Parade, where thousands and thousands of Modrons basically just explore the outer planes. And nobody actually knows what is the purpose of the march, but many assume that it is for information gathering, where you effectively just send machines all over the multiverse in order to catalog and record everything, and then all that information gets sent back to Primus, who indeed saves it. Well, in this case, basically Tenebrous took over the role of Primus, actually became Primus for a while, and then forced an early march. He instructed all of the Modrons to basically just look for his wand. In the end, they didn't find the wand, but then found who had hidden it. Short story short, Tenebrous ended up using his last word to kill a Mind Flayer deity to look for information. He figured out that there was a blossom in Bator in the Nine Hells which could cure the Styx amnesia, and then used it on the undead drow who had hidden the wand, and then found the wand and defeated Kyrian, and of course, took over his realm once again and reclaimed his name of Orcus. It is then said that a large coalition of gods got together to banish and seal the magic of the last word and presumably destroy it for all time. Oh, and the next Modron in line became the new Primus. It's a really interesting and cool story, by the way. Now, since then, Orcus decided to never let his guard down again. Now, it is not explicitly said, but there has been, of course, a large change to Orcus's body, where he now looks more undead than he did before. Currently, he probably is something more akin to a demigod with some divine inclinations, though the rules that he plays by do appear to be a bit different from others. And not truly a full divine creature, but something adjacent, something very, very close. So, let's describe him. This massive demon stands 15 feet tall, with his frame being a combination of both living muscle, bloated flesh, rot, and skeleton. His head is that of a ram with a great maw filled with tusks, and his thick furred legs and incloven hoofs. His legs are goat-like, while his chest and hands are human-like. His wings are bat-like and leathery. He carries with him always, of course, the Wand of Orcus, made from bones as hard as iron, and is topped with a magically enlarged skull that once belonged to a human hero slain by Orcus. Plants wither, drinks spoil, flesh rots, and vermin thrive in the wand's presence. Now, even though it can't be seen on most art, Orcus actually does possess a tail which can inject a debilitating toxin that can weaken most foes to the point of paralysis in a mere minute. Now, Orcus himself is a demon lord of Undeath, and so all his powers revolve around creating undead creatures and controlling them. In fact, lichdom is one of his favorite things to grant his followers. It was in fact Orcus who indeed granted Vecna the ritual to originally become a lich, turning them, upon death, into the greatest of all liches. And so, the armies of Orcus in the Abyss are predominantly undead, in what is believed to be a literal never-ending force. Demons hate fighting him because there is never an actual end to the forces that he can control, and furthermore, any enemy slain by Orcus's forces then will of course become raised as more undead to join the infinite army. Now, not much is known about the origins of Orcus, though demons believe that he was once a mortal who lived a life of wickedness, and so, as a chaotic, evil mortal, he was sent upon death into the Abyss, where he became a larva, then a mane. He evolved into a Rudderkin, then into a Nalfenschnee. It is said that by the time the Githyanki were rebelling against the Mind Flayers on the astral plane, Orcus was a Nalfenschnee that sat on the 400th Lair's Court of Woe. Eventually, of course, he turned into a Baelor and then conquered the Lair 113th to become what he is today. Now, nowadays, most of his time is spent in the same war that you all know very well. This never-ending conflict between Demogorgon, Grasset, and Orcus. It is very explicitly described, actually, that Demogorgon is much more powerful than Orcus, and that's why Orcus typically doesn't fight him or his armies directly. Instead, he sends vampires and such to subtly undermine the Prince of Demons in whatever ways he can, whereas with Grasset, he sends everything he's got. Typically, the battle as it unfolds today is effectively Demogorgon and Orcus versus Grasset, with the occasional confrontation between Orcus and Demogorgon. Now, the cultists of Orcus are very interesting, since that's what makes Orcus so formidable. He's not really strong because of his physical might or his incredible intellect, but instead the grand power of his cultist, who is much greater than any other demon lord, since this grants him at least some measure of divine power. Orcus demands living sacrifice as part of his rituals. Blood and skulls are an important part of the imagery used in his worship. Idols and altars are often surrounded by or built upon tall piles of skulls. Intelligent undead never willingly serve Orcus. They are more likely to venerate the deities Vecna or Erythnul. However, many vampires, liches, and other undead creatures are forced into his service by dark pacts or compelling magic. Priests, and particularly influential followers of Orcus, are called skulls, while high priests are called skull lords. Often, a single skull lord gains so much power and influence among the followers of Orcus that he adopts the mantle of Skull King or Skull Queen. It is common for followers of Orcus to carry black, skull-topped scepters around, not in order to fool anyone into thinking that they wield the actual Wand of Orcus, but to represent and remind others of their lord's dread might. They also often wear skull masks and black robes with hoods, or goat-horned headdresses and silver robes." End quote. The cultists of Orcus are notorious necrophiliacs, one of the foulest fetishes among evil humanoids, which of course is the enjoyment of sex with the dead. Quote, "Necrophiliacs may have sex with corpses as part of a religious rite, or as a sign of fealty to a higher power, or simply for their own pleasure." End quote. It is said that particularly vile individuals use the bodies of those defeated and slain enemies to give themselves a feeling of power and superiority. Now, those who please Orcus are granted abilities that are something akin to magic and spells, but it's more of a dark blessing that turns you into what is called a Thrall of Orcus. These Thralls are always either powerful necromancers or notorious necrophiliacs that consort with undead creatures and demons and form small cells of depraved evil hidden in cities and quiet villages. As a rite to turn into one of these Thralls, you must sacrifice an intelligent being in a horrific ritual which takes place in complete darkness atop an altar made of at least 30 skulls. Now, those who are blessed by Orcus become putrid, almost as if they are undead themselves while still alive. They obtain the ability to grow demonic wings and procedurally become more and more like their dread lord, as some of them grow obese like Orcus or become gaunt and skeletal-like. Further, they gain incredible power to summon the dead, from vampires to ghosts and zombies, including the pinnacle of all blessings, which grants the Thrall the ability to summon a Nightwing, an enormous bat-like demon that performs as a flying mount. Now, if you want to ascend higher within the ranks of Orcus's cultist, you have to accept a summon by Orcus into his demonic lair, where you will be ushered test in order to become a Skull Lord. If you failed, you become a Lich under the control of Orcus, but if you succeed, you retain your mortality and get a great power to control the undead. Then, as a Skull Lord, you would use this power to tame an army of savage undead that you would find on the demonic lair, and then bring that army over into the Prime in order to conquer land in the name of Orcus. Then, if you're really good at that, of course, you would then become a Skull King. Now, as we mentioned before, Orcus's realm is called Thanatos. It is described as a place filled with ash-gray clouds and cold black skies. It has the nickname the Belly of Death, a place where daylight never shines. Quote, "The lair's immense melancholic moon changes faces at random when covered by clouds, making time difficult to measure. A handful of cities crouch upon the lair's vast tundras, heavens for the mortal and immortal cultists who seek to emulate the life of their demonic patron. Outside the cities, roving hordes of thousands of undead roam across the land in search of flesh. The strongest and most ambitious of Orcus's thralls attempt to dominate and command these armies, leading them on invasions of the material plane and the lairs of rival demon princes like Grasset and Demogorgon." End quote. Now, the lair itself is not just filled physically by undead, but it's almost sort of empowered by the very essence of undeath, and so it is quite deadly for living creatures unless they have received the blessing of Orcus. Living creatures in this realm take damage every single second that they exist within the realm, unless they are warded against death. And typically just having an enchantment like Death Ward is enough to prevent this damage effectively for as long as the ward holds. However, you must also consider that the lair is not meant to be breathed, since of course it is a realm of undead. As such, the air is extremely thin in here, and those who need it must succeed on a Constitution saving throw or quickly become fatigued and exhausted. Typically, failing 2 of these checks will result in the adventurer beginning to suffocate. On the same vein, because of the lack of oxygen, very little plant life exists here, and you will typically find only mosses, molds, and fungi. Now, if you die anywhere on the realm, you will automatically be raised up as an undead, though this can of course be reversed by the resurrection spell. Undead on the lair also heal over time as they are being bombarded constantly with power from the negative energy plane, which Orcus is quite adept at utilizing. Now, this here is a map of Thanatos. As you can tell, Orcus is blessed with the river Styx passing through his realm, which is always, of course, a big boon. The river Styx tends to be great for places where it passes through because many people actually use it to travel all across the plains. So it just means that many people do pass through this particular realm, which is a good thing. Now, the river ends by the frozen sea, which stretches as far as the eye can see into an icy wasteland. The ice here extends for miles below the surface as well. Now, if you were to follow the icy wasteland to its end, it would eventually reach the Abyssal Sea, which is an enormous vast ocean that connects many of the different layers of the abyss. Now, we're gonna go one-on-one through each of these locations so that you guys know what they're all about. Naratir here used to be the capital of Thanatos when Kiransali dominated the realm. Now it is simply a desolate, sprawling den of treachery and murder as the remnants of the aristocracy from her times struggle to survive and make a name for themselves now that Orcus rules the land. Oh, keep in mind, by the way, that the revival of Orcus happened very recently as far as the canon is concerned. It really could have been just like 200 years ago tops. Lashembrar is technically the center of Thanatos, since it is here where Orcus originally took over the lair and used his demonic power to take ownership of the land. Technically, the lair just sort of extends from this centerpiece. And nowadays, this is where most of the cultists of Orcus congregate whenever they make pilgrimages into the lair. The city has an enormous aurora borealis type of effect of different colors that permeates the sky. That's why you see this little icon in here. Vadrian is a ruined city that is abandoned. It used to be the stronghold of a powerful Baelor that betrayed Orcus and got owned, basically. Nowadays, you would only find in here a faction of planar scholars and philosophers that study death. They are called the Dust Men, but we'll probably cover them when we touch Sigil, the City of Doors, later on. The city of Straight Curves is another ruined, frozen-over ghost town where only a few people live. It is mostly the lair of a powerful servant of Orcus named Gluzidval, who has the entire city enchanted so that those that enter can basically never find their way out. He makes it so that the streets that appear straight, in fact, loop back upon themselves and bend in magical and extra-dimensional ways, hence the name of the city. The place is meant to look like a safe haven from the outside, but then obviously meant to trick people into getting stuck. Orcus Gate is where the demons loyal to Orcus live. The name comes from the fact that there is a permanent portal that links this layer with the first layer of the Abyss, so that the demons of Orcus can go and fight in the Blood War in the front lines and then come back home. Lacrimosa is the actual practical capital of Thanatos, where most of the people live. It is also the most hospitable place in all of this layer. The place is nicknamed the Cauldron of Tears because of rust-red geysers that spurt steam and water across the port. Now, even though Naratir was the living capital under Kiransi's rule, Lacrimosa was her seat of power, and you could still see her actual fortress, which is called the Forbidden Citadel, still standing. Many people actually wonder why Orcus hasn't destroyed it, but most believe that it is because it was created using powerful divine energy, and since Orcus is not technically a full deity yet, it can't quite destroy it. Interestingly though, there is a hidden device under the Citadel protected by divine locks that opens to a vortex to the heart of the positive plane. The lore describes it that if it were to be ever opened, then it would have devastating repercussions not just for Thanatos, but perhaps for the whole of the Abyss. Golmingthor is where the cultists of Orcus who fail Orcus go to, where they are transformed into liches. So thousands of liches live here, all of which are controlled by Orcus. They often try and venture outside of the plane of hunger to capture and control hordes of free undead that roam in the fields in hopes of obtaining armies and then impressing their master. Now, the final hills separate what is effectively the realm of Thanatos and the personal and private realm of Orcus. It is also worth mentioning, by the way, that over here in the Valley of the Crypt Things, you can find maze-like passages of undead-filled corridors that eventually connect to the endless maze, the abyssal layer of Baphomet. At the far end, we have Oblivion's End, the periphery of civilized Thanatos. Here is a sprawling desert of bone meal with howling windstorms, the screams of lost incorporeal undead, and the massive fortress of Everlost. The tower is made from countless bones, specifically retrieved from all of the grand conquest of Orcus' armies throughout the Abyss and Material Plane. Now, this here is the seat of power of Orcus, and is of course where you can personally find him. And from here, he issues decrees to his cult, pronounces death sentences to those that offend him, and effectively rules the lair. Overall, Orcus is not really a hands-on demon prince, preferring the solitude of his existence. He would much rather just let his underlings deal with all of the details of ruling his vast kingdom and all of the movements from his armies in the prime. He simply lays out the grand plans and basically like the end goals, and then trusts his confident demon sergeants and powerful lich servants to carry out the deeds. Now, moving a bit into the power of the Demon Lord himself, we of course have stat sheets and abilities like we do for many of the Demon Lords, including some which do appear in 5th edition. However, as I mentioned before, Orcus is not really a hands-on Demon Lord. He's not really the type to mess with you directly by appearing right in front of you and attacking you. Further, he's actually not that powerful physically, at least not compared to someone the likes of Demogorgon, who is just brimming with power, abilities, and exquisite magic and skill. Instead, what Orcus possesses is an indescribable ability to control the undead. Generally speaking, even the most powerful of necromancer have limits to how many undead they can control, or a limit to what kind of undead they can create. Orcus just simply has no limits. Fighting Orcus is tricky simply because he can just move his wand around and then summon a bunch of true vampires to fight for him. He really can just do that. His abilities to raise undead have no limits, and as long as he has these spell slots, he can just keep on using such spells without having to worry about silly things like concentration. Now, you of course can understand how tricky it must be to fight one who can simply control liches. I mean, liches are of course some of the most powerful monsters in Dungeons & Dragons, and this is why we won't really delve deep into his physical attributes and abilities, because that's not really what makes him strong. It is, however, very interesting that in spite of him being so close to the undead, he actually has no love for them. Quote, Orcus is, in many ways, a contradictory figure. He does not delight in his charges, the undead, and has not taken up the self-proclaimed mantle of Prince of the Undead out of devotion or allegiance. If anything, the Demon Lord despises the undead. He has little but contempt for them and uses them without thought or consideration. Of course, Orcus despises the living as well. He hates everything and everyone, often being almost overwhelmed with revulsion and loathing. He craves only personal power and the spread of misery and destruction for all others." End quote. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is, of course, one of the most fascinating artifacts within Dungeons & Dragons history. Even though there is not much to it that we know in lore, it nonetheless is a name that many of us recognize. The Wand of Orcus. As we described it before, it has a potent amount of Orcus' essence instilled into it, making the two of them virtually linked. Further, the wand shares many of the abilities of its dreadful master, being a powerful magic item in its own right that can control and summon undead, as well as cast a veritable cascade of death-related spells. Quote, "Occasionally, Orcus allows his wand to be found by a mortal in order to wreak greater chaos and evil amongst those inhabiting the material plane. This sort of dalliance lasts only for a short time, perhaps a year or two at most, before the bloated prince grows bored and reclaims his artifact, usually along with the soul of whoever currently wields it." End quote. This is why, of course, you find many stories of adventurers finding the fabled Wand of Orcus just simply hidden in dungeons or under the care of powerful masters. If you ever fought Orcus, you would actually notice, though, that he relies heavily on that wand. Interestingly, much more preferring to fight in melee than far away using spells. His powerful natural attacks completely become second thoughts, though, not using his tails or claws or ramming attacks at all, instead focusing entirely on using the wand physically to deal damage. And this is, of course, provided that he's fighting only a few foes. If he's fighting dozens of warriors, then of course he would choose to be careful and then summon undead and Tanari to aid him as he backs off and fights from a distance. See, but the reason that he prefers to use his wand physically in combat most of the time is not just because of how unbelievably powerful it is, which it is, but the biggest reason is that every single strike from the wand afflicts the enemy with a full cast of death magic. Basically, every single strike he lands on you, you would be forced to make a Constitution saving throw or just simply die. See, all other demon lords have fancy abilities, tricky spells, powerful secret trump cards. Orcus is simple, just a simple demon lord, straight to the point. If you get hit, you die. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to go over to MrRex.com to check out our incredible new Orcus merch. And this is some of the sickest art that I have seen for a demon lord, so you cannot miss out on this. I mean, look at this. Jesus, this is awesome. I think I might just put this on some stickers, man. I need to plaster this on everything. But please go and check out the merch. I would greatly appreciate it. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters, Barry Mascan, 5e Magic Shop, Morgan Johnson, Rusty Rain, Doc Feeder, The Great Codini, Omega Scales, Alex Cookson, Benjamin Bosters, Falky951, Ordoric, Sabim Kurshab, Solarensis, Thomas Hunt, Nathan McComb, Soulless Rider, Lost Crusader, Mr. Salty, Stalia, JD Green, Olaf Clapp, Trev909, Brian Camp, Chad Aga, John the Wicket, Stephen, Tony Arcee, Fatman52, George Fortland, Sovereign Mind, Trevor Hess, Draglugia5, The Living Guild Pack, Michael Walker, Streeblow, Describe, Herbert Johnson, The Wizard's Vault, Dragon19, Guy97, James the Perverted, Shottycast, Hiram at Questing Under Their Influence Podcast, Horrorbound, Jeffrey A. Alexander, Jesse Feliciano, John Callio, and Helion Vanta Main for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/MrRex to support. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.